come in and make it?
That would be a good question for the Board of Realtors.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
that's
We
all.
don't
Thank
have
you.
we don't have a code on that. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
I'd like to. I think we'd like to hear from because.
Again, this is Mr. Richard Craig with BRC Engineering.
Yeah, Richard Craig, happy to take any technical questions. I know acoustics and sound can be hard for people, so I was listening. I'll have just 4 comments, and then if you have a question, feel free to ask. Someone asked, how loud is 65 dB? The scale goes from 0 to above 100. 0 is the quietest sound a human can hear. We're all too old. There's one person here that might still be able to hear 0, and she's about 4 years old. Because loud noises affect our hearing over time. The government actually requires you to measure noise if it's over 90. That would be OSHA in a workplace. So over 90, the employer has to measure. How accurate are these meters? They're calibrated with a little pack of cigarettes you put over the top, and that will give you accuracy of on the order of plus or minus 0.2 of a dB. So they're very accurate. Now you might ask, well, how good is that compared to a human? A human can detect plus or minus 3 dB. So plus or minus 2 is 10 times better than a human. So the meters are very, very accurate. Temperature, someone asked what temperature range do they work over? In general, a wider range than humans want to be in because they're rated from a number roughly freezing up to 120 degrees. So they're accurate to this plus or minus 2 from roughly freezing up to 120. So you could go out in most environments and do very good work. Someone asked measuring time. How do you know whether you've measured for a long enough period of time? The answer is you do it again. If you get the same answer, it was enough. If you measure twice and you don't get the same answer, the rule of thumb is double the measuring time and see if the answer changes. Because there will be a time that's enough where you get the same answer twice. So some noises are repetitive in a slower way, so you have to measure longer. But that's the answer is you measure twice and see if you get the same answer. Anyone have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think a part of that question, at least I heard Supervisor Toffanelli ask if, say an officer arrives on a scene and there is a complaint and the device is in the trunk and just in practical matter, how long does it take them to get out and grab the device and put it to work? Is that
to get it out of the trunk, set it up, turn it on. It takes a few seconds to boot up. It is a computer. And calibrate. You could do that in 2 minutes.
Okay. You didn't bring one, did you?
I did. Do you want to see one?
Yes, I'd like to.
Mr. Craig, I'm real interested in the impulse and repetitive noise.
Yes.
And I mean, a situation that we have that Ms. Ostroff brought up is you have the same noise. It might be at a dB level of 65, let's say, but it's going on all day long.
Yes.
Or it's start, stop, start, stops.
Yes.
And the machines, I mean, how do you evaluate whether this is endangers or whatever?
A noise.
A noise or disturbs the property owners or owners in this case.
Yeah, that's a tougher question, and that gets into what is noise. And we would define noise as unwanted sound. And some noises are very short in time, like a hand clap or a gunshot or blasting in a gravel pit. The meters all measure that all the time, whether you want them to or not, and there are different descriptors for those impulsive noises. You saw some of these in the standard you have, or the ordinance. LEQ is the average noise over a period of time. There are other metrics that describe how impulsive noise is. And those other metrics maybe are better descriptors for gunshots or blasting. But the meters can all do that. In fact, they do that measurement whether you want them to or not. So those metrics are in the meter if you choose to print them out. And they would have more relevance to impulsive noises, is what I would say. L-max is not a particularly good one for impulsive noise.
So we don't define in here repetitive noise
Well, or impulsive noise.
or impulsive noise.
Yeah, that might be something you could consider. The meters measure it. It's just whether it's in your ordinance or not.
So if you measure a impulsive or repetitive noise,
Yeah.
do you do it for a specific length of time, half an hour, all day, 15 minutes? I mean, you're the expert.
Well, again, you do the measurement twice. If it was a gunshot, you'd measure 2 gunshots. If you get about the same answer, you would assume the next 10 gunshots would be the same. If it's in a gravel pit and it's blasting, you'd measure a couple of blasts. And if you get the same answer twice, you assume the next 10 blasts would give you the same answer. So enough time is the answer.
So I guess my question then to you is, at what point or how do we say that repetitive noise is disturbing?
Yeah, that's a tougher question.
And how do we
Yeah.
evaluate that? I mean, how does the officer evaluate that? The neighbor is saying this is a repetitive noise that goes on.
Yeah, that gets into what is the definition of annoyance, and that's human, unfortunately.
So what about some of your other clients? Or
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm not a noise consultant, so I hesitate to cross over into the consulting area. There are consultants that do that, and they look at.
Okay, so you're a technical expert. All right, I'll
Yeah.
take a technical expert.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the decibel level 65,
Yeah,
and it's 65 all day long.
yeah, that'd be the background noise. Yeah.
So we don't deal with that.
Yeah, there are ways to deal with that in an ordinance, but yours doesn't have any of those.
Is there a reason for that, Captain Messina?
Well, it's explained in the ordinance that if there is a background noise, it's subtracted from the other noise. Is that what you're asking? Why is there no ongoing
Well, if you
noise?
have a repetitive noise,
Impulsive. You mean
Or
impulsive, like
impulse.
a gunshot or blast at a
and
gravel
you have
pit?
it every 5 minutes all day
It registers
long,
64,
and
but yet it goes on all day, I think is what she's saying.
Yeah, if it doesn't break the threshold, I mean, that's where you would need to give us discretion to lower that DBA level if that's what you want done. But I mean, there are parameters and criteria and elements of the law. For us to issue a citation or to enforce, we need to be within the elements of the law, or we are not going to issue a citation the judge is not going to convict. So it boils down to, does the noise fit in to the elements of this ordinance, which is essentially going to be a law.
okay. But it's repetitive. It's not once or twice or 5 times. It's repetitive all through the day. We don't address that. And so if it's a 64 or,
Okay.
I mean, Jim, we have an issue that and I know the answer is the Forest Service has to do something, but in the meantime, if we can enforce something, do we decibel all day long? And if we say, aha, there's one that exceeds 65,
The alternative is to lower or change or put a different
parameter.
different level, different change the elements of the law. I'm not talking about that particular case, but I'd be very hesitant to change the law to fit one particular circumstance. I understand where you're coming from, but if that's the board's direction and that's what you want to do, fine. Just keep in mind, we're going to enforce whatever law gets put forth here.
I'm not questioning the number. I mean, at this point, I'm not questioning the number.
The energy.
I am questioning the repetitiveness of that.
The energy would always get measured, and it's in that number. But there's the question of annoyance, and that's very difficult to answer.
Can we do a test at some point with the equipment? Do you loan it so we could do a test?
Yeah, demonstrations are always possible.
Demonstration, an all-day demonstration?
Yeah,
at
certainly.
a hidden location? Thank you.
Is this, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is this device a directional device?
Actually, in the old days they were. These days they aren't. So
I was looking at it and had like a probe on
You
it,
can-
so you just, it doesn't matter. So when you're measuring ambient noise, you're not having to point it, you're getting it from all directions.
you get it from all directions these days. The microphones have gotten smaller, so they're not directional anymore. They still say point it at the source if you know where the source is. But if you don't know, it really won't matter.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to just open it one more time to the public. If you have any questions you would like Mr. Craig to answer. But just Mr. Craig. Okay, thank you. Mr. Kelly.
I would like my wet header question answered, please.
Can you repeat the question, Mr. Keller? I'll see if I can answer.
Where does this document reference all, well, sorry, not that one, but in particular the 1970 manufactured boats with wet headers? And is there a noticing of baffle requirements if those are required on the county side of the lake? Or what type of baffling system is required for those boats if they do not allow wet headers, or if they do allow wet headers, I should say.
Are you asking if that is included in this particular ordinance?
Well, it is a noise. It's a noise that can exceed what Madam Chair is talking about, because have you ever heard of blown flat bottom takeoff?
Unfortunately, I have not.
It is an awesome sight and it's an awesome sound. I particularly like it, but others may not. But what I'm getting at, it's something that you, as I said before, you take these 1970 boats. We now have 500 cubic inch Chevrolets, 502s, replacing the 454, the 396, the 350, whatever you want to look at. And they're taking these and producing incredible horsepower out of these things, depending upon what performance products they put on them. And it also increases the ability of noise. I like the noise, but there's a lot of people around that don't. But if you're going to do a restriction, how are you going to look at those types of boats if they're allowed on these lakes or this waterways?
I'm not familiar with the entire California Boating and Waterways Code, but I believe there's a section that specifically deals with that outside of this ordinance. I don't have our Boating and Waterways supervisor here, but I guess get back to you would probably be the best thing I could do at this point. I'm not completely familiar with that.
Well, I think, though, it is a point to be possibly looked at for this ordinance if it needs to be identified. It was also give another document or a source of information for somebody wanting to come up here to be able to go look at. I do believe in government speak that everything should be cross-referenced. So you hit one ordinance, you don't have to jump over to this one. You can have a pretty good idea of what the other ordinance is going to say that this ordinance is creating. We have too much duplication in government speak of ordinances. Thank you, sir.
The issue, Jim, is relating to like motorcycles, because we have a lot of motorcycles.
Sure.
And you measure a motorcycle and it's a 65, or it's been beefed up, but you have, 500 motorcycles. what? Do you cite 500 motorcycle people?
No,
No.
I don't think that was the question, but okay.
All right. So I want to bring some closure to this and give Captain Macedo some direction on what's the pleasure of the board.
Could I start?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate you bringing this back, and I want to revisit some what seems to me at this point a little ancient history. We talked about this session that we had in April, but all of us should remember that the events that led up to that study session in April were a room packed with people, particularly in the Lake Tulloch area, that were very concerned about the noises that were emanating from rental properties, where parties were getting out of hand, and there was a long discussion about that. And I remember that the Sheriff's Department came up at one point and said, give us an ordinance that we can enforce and we can fix this problem. So my question to you is, we've got some tweaking to do on this and some alternatives to select, but if we approve or give you this document as an enforcement document, is it going to fulfill your promise that it will fix the problem, specifically on the rentals and on the motorcycle tracks and stuff that we're seeing out in the residential areas?
It needs some tweaking, and in fact, it needs a couple of additions. And also, I need to take back what the board and the public has put forward today. But we also need to have some input in there. But I think we're headed down that path. I want to caution everybody: this is not a magic wand. It is not going to solve everyone's particular problems, but it will definitely help us. And I very clearly recall, Supervisor Thomas, you wanting this brought forward due to those same reasons. My perspective is not just from your particular district, it's from the county as a whole. So we supported you wanting to bring that forward because we had particular problems throughout the county. But I hesitate to say any one law is a magic wand. This ordinance may need further tweaking down the road. Some other things may come up. Generally speaking, laws aren't perfect the first time they're written, and that's what we're in the process of writing. But I do think we're heading down the right path.
Well, the folks who came here from Poker Flat, they had an alternate suggestion for us. They just said, enforce the ordinances that you have regarding the rental, the duration of rentals, and that'll solve the problem. And I particularly did not want to prohibit short-term rentals throughout the county to solve a noise problem. So I'm very much in support of continuing with this and refining it, and I have no problem with allocating somehow the money that it would take to get these devices in place. I'm very very pleased that you've brought it back, and I will continue to support the effort.
Thank you.
Supervisor Tuffanelli?
I'm looking at it, and at first I wasn't too in favor of this clause about the boats and the dates on the boats. I wasn't sure where that was coming from, but when Mr. Kelly spoke, it came a little bit clearer to me what they were trying to say here. And apparently manufactured boats after 2002 have some type of sound limitations put on the motors. But again, the boat could be manufactured prior to that, and as Mr. Kelly brought up, wet headers, which have no baffles in them, it's just straight, short pipes coming out, tremendous amount of noise. So I would like to see something in here addressing that concern. Rather than a date put in here of a manufacturing date, you could modify a boat manufactured after that and still not be exempt. So I don't know if you're looking at a hull number on here, or you're looking at a motor, the date of the motor manufacturing, or what have you. But I think that area needs to be tweaked out a little bit there to address that.
Okay, before we move on, can I ask you to refer to page 6, please?
What?
Can I ask you to refer to page 6, please?
Yes.
Items 3 and 4.
Item 4A?
Correct, 3 and 4A.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to understand you clearly. You are not in favor of either one of those sections, and you want that studied further.
Well, I'm not in favor of putting a number or a date on a boat manufacturing, because if you go up there and read it, pleasure boat engines manufactured on or after January 1st, 2002 shall not exceed a level of 88 dB. Then you go down here and it says pleasure motor boat engine shall not exceed a sound level of 75 dBA. So I'm assuming something prior to 2002 can't go over 75, but yet a lot of those motors don't have the restrictions that they have from 2002 forward. So anybody that has somebody that has a boat manufactured after 2002 can go a higher level. I think it needs to be refined there. If we're going to go with 88 dBs and not put in the officer's hand, is it 2002, when was the motor, so forth. I think it needs to be a level. If it's going to be 88, let's make them all 88.
Okay, so you do want a boating section in there, you're just not comfortable with the dates and the language.
Correct.
Just to understand you correctly. Okay, and there may be boating and waterways laws that cover this already. I'll study that and get back to you. And I know with motorcycles and vehicles, I'm much more familiar with the vehicle code. There are laws that address issues related to Jake brakes and exhaust on motorcycles, so it may already be covered.
One other section on page 11, under exemptions, section F, where it gives an exemption from sound and fire occurring while hunting, consistent with all state laws and private property. A number of complaints we've had in a row, several, have come from people saying that they have neighbors that target practice. I guess this goes back to a repetitive, and I think Marita was touching on the outskirts of this. I knew where she was coming from. How do you determine if somebody's hunting? If they're out on their 150 acres and they're putting cans up and they're shooting and they're going at it all day because they have the family from Alabama up here or whatever, and you got 10 guns firing all day, and the sheriff officer comes up and they say, we're hunting varmint, we're hunting rabbits. I mean, it seems open here.
The deputies up here, especially in this county, are familiar with what hunting is and what hunting's not, and they will be able to recognize that they're target practicing as opposed to hunting. And if there's some debate or excuse, we can look at hunting licenses and that. I think the definition of hunting, I'm pretty confident we'd be able to determine that.
So there, I would like to see, in my opinion, some type of wordage here that addresses target practice.
Okay.
Exempting hunting and not target. I mean, there's people that like to do that activity, and I can see where it comes to a point Marita was trying to touch on. If it's an all-day activity, there needs to be some verbiage in here maybe that limits that.
So what would you like to see? You would like to see hours restricting target practice?
I would think that might be able to address it. Some.
Are you suggesting hours and duration?
Well, it's a possibility. It could be a combination of both. I don't know what other rural counties do, and you research Placer, you brought up, in a couple other counties. I'm sure it's addressed because it is an activity that people do, and they enjoy doing it, and to limit it to them on their property doesn't quite sit right with me. I think we need to address it, and I'll research it myself and maybe give you a call on it.
Okay.
But I know where Marita was coming from, and I'm kind of in agreement with her on that issue, a repetitive sound that you don't want to hear it all day. I mean, somebody's out there shooting cannons for 10, 12, 15 hours. Obviously, you're going to interfere with other property, other residences, not wanting to hear that. If it's going on all weekend, if it goes on for 3 or 4 day weekend, that's going to create a problem, even if it's not over a 65 dB threshold. I don't want to. I want to be able to sit out on my deck and enjoy my backyard space. And if it abuts somebody that has 200 acres, 400 acres, or whatever, I want to be able to enjoy myself out there with not hearing this repetitive noise continuously over the entire weekend. However, at the same time, he has a right to partake on activities on his property. I think we need to address it some way where it limits it, or it puts some type of sunset on it as to hours or something. This is a very, very touchy situation here and how you handle it, but I think it's something that needs to be addressed, in my opinion.
Okay.
Steve?
I find the moment to be somewhat regrettable that we have come to the point in Calaveras County where courtesy and consideration for one another is to give way to an ordinance, and we call out an already stretched law enforcement to try to address it. And then further, we move from, I guess one of the aspects of that is that courtesy and consideration for others has to do not so much with what we think is noise, but what somebody else might think of as noise. And that's where we've gotten into a lot of trouble in a lot of places with a lot of activities and a lot of different backgrounds and sensibilities. What's noise for some? I remember the background noise in Oakland being louder than anything I have to hear, but I didn't notice it because it was just there all the time. But here we've gotten to this point, and there's almost no, I would like to have other alternatives. I'd like to see mediation effective, but it hasn't worked. I'd like to see one visit from a sheriff be enough. I'd like to see when the neighbors are shooting down in the canyon and bullets are actually going through people's windows, I like them to see that as rude. But that's no longer seems to be possible, that a handshake across a fence or a neighbor discussion would solve this. And then we get to places like Tulloch or up in the rental areas in other parts of the county, and we find landlords that, despite repeated concerns expressed by all the neighbors, are simply continuing to rent to people who are, again, rude. So here we are with an ordinance. It's complicated. It will fill up courts that are already overloaded. It will take more time from the sheriff. I like the idea of having a fine that may prevent the second, third, fourth, and fifth, but I don't see these numbers as necessarily effective even in deterrence in some cases. So my personal opinion would be, where I'd tweak this would be that on the third and further violations, that we start talking about some big numbers on fines, and at least that would pay for the equipment necessary and the time, I suppose, ultimately with the administrative applications to at least break even on this. And still, as we pass something of this nature, we will have a good majority of the issues be under the decibels or be stopped by the time somebody pulls the equipment out, and we get back to the same old thing, which is, how are people dealing with one another, and is there any civility left between people in our society? I'm pessimistic about the ultimate effect. It may raise expectations and numeric events and still have many people dissatisfied with the behavior of their neighbors. Nevertheless, I support both matters that were brought up by the two previous speakers. I think we've got a little bit of adjustment to make. I have nothing further to add. My threatened discussion about school noise, I'm convinced by presentations that makes no sense. And most of our school districts are doing just fine. We have one situation with the CUP that needs to be reviewed under that circumstance. So I'll leave that one behind and pass it on to Tom.
My thoughts, Jim, are I would like you to continue with the ordinance and continue refining it. The one thing that came up that I would be in disagreement with, I'm fine defending the right to go hunting. You know, I'm not really comfortable with the idea that you can just go out target practicing if you have a house next door and be that disturbing, or have a dirt bike track or whatever else kind of activities. I mean, you know, I have lots of friends that hunt that are in the city limits of Angels Camp, and they go out and sight in their hunting rifles and do all that without disturbing neighbors. They go to a designated area that allows for that. I don't think everybody that has a 5 or 10 or 20 acre parcel, or even a bigger ranch, needs to target practice where it's bothering a residential home, because target practice can just go on forever, and depending on how close it is, it can be very disturbing. And quite frankly, we have enough people that are anti-gun without creating more anti-gun people for no reason at all, just by being rude, as Steve would say. So, but you know, I think defending hunting is fine. I'm all for that, and that's an occasional use, and hopefully, you know, the hunters are good neighbors. At least they always have been for me. So, but I don't think we need to start authorizing target practicing. We've already had issues before us where one person would train horses, and the neighbor had a dispute, so he would come out and target practice whenever he saw the guy down at the barn trying to train horses, and you know, made that very difficult. So I just don't see the need. We have other avenues for target practicing as opposed to just, you know, doing it on a 5 or 10 acre parcel or what have you.
So you are or not in favor of limiting the hours of target practice? I'm not sure. I'm
not for allowing. I mean, if somebody calls and says, I'm being disturbed, my neighbor's target practicing, I think you should pull your meter out. And if it violates those conditions, you should ask him not to target practice.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that you can have hours to annoy your neighbor.
Okay.
There's other avenues for target practicing.
Okay. And you mentioned motorcycles just briefly.
Well, just, you know, we've had some complaints where somebody had a dirt bike track, you know, and invited his kids and all his friends' kids over, and you know, it was making a tremendous amount of noise and dust, et cetera. And I think you should just, I mean, you know, you pull out your meter and you say, no, this isn't an acceptable use here. If someone complains, if no one's complaining, then obviously you're not going to go looking.
Well, that's the case in anything. Unless you get a complaint, he's not going to go out looking.
Well, no one complained, and they pulled me over and gave me a traffic ticket, Gary.
So you did get a ticket.
That was in my younger days. I mean, you know, it comes back to my theme about rural sprawl. I mean, you put residences all over the country, we're going to have never-ending levels of problems, whether it's roosters, whether it's target practicing, whether it's dirt bike tracks, whether it's whatever. We're just going to have never-ending conflicts, and then, you know, we need to try to encourage residents to live within the community centers, and then have outlets where you go target practicing and you do these things, and you have dirt bike tracks and what have you, and designated areas. So anyway, those are my thoughts. I'd like you to proceed and You know, I don't want guns to get a bad name because of people that are sort of abusing the privilege, in my opinion.
Okay, well, I will piggyback on Gary and Tom. I would like to do a test on repetitive noise because I don't think we addressed that, and maybe you and I and Mr. Craig can discuss that later to do a test. The other is one I had asked where it's not going to be, and you addressed it, but I didn't think it was quite clear. It's going, the intent is not to cite the property managers, but to cite the person creating the noise and or at some point the property owner. And
Do you want me to clarify that?
well, I heard what you said. I just didn't think this was clear. Yeah, I guess I'd like that because it just said, or person, page 13, D. Any person in control of the property, would that be a rental agent and so forth? I just kind of felt you have the person doing the noise, you have the property owner, if it's a short-term or long-term, doesn't matter, and then you have the property manager. I just felt at some point maybe we should clarify that. And the intent is to cite the person making the noise. I think this is a concern when it's short-term. And then just some of my minor things that were addressed in my email to you. I don't think we need to go over them here. Okay, are there any, Jim, did you have any other questions or clarifications from the board?
Just briefly, I listened very carefully to what you all said, and when we arrive onto these scenes, we realize what we represent and what it looks like to the people that are obviously the victims and the people that are being complained upon, and we realize our presence alone can tend to heat up a situation. Most of us know that. And with respect to Supervisor Walensky's comments, we go so much as kind of judge the person we're speaking to that's called us. And if we think that they are a poor communicator, or that if they go over with their neighbor and they're going to, further cause a problem, we make suggestions like, have you thought about writing them a letter so that there isn't that one-on-one conversation. We do everything we can to not be cops, for lack of a better term, during what is a civil neighborhood issue. But you have to keep in mind when we are there, you get people that come and complain to you at the board. When we are there during the heat of the moment, when people are upset, and even at those times, sometimes reasonable people are not being reasonable in the heat of the moment. And even further beyond that, then you have the element of society that's not going to be reasonable. So I would just, in closing, I understand what you have all said very clearly, but we have to write this ordinance for all types of people, for the entire community, not for a particular problem in a particular area. I think we're going to get ourselves in trouble if we do that. So I would like it to be very all-encompassing and understand, the target audience and both the victims and the suspects of these. They're wide-ranging people. I don't want to specify it down to a certain particular area, such as the Lake or Forest Service or one particular bad neighbor. I just want to emphasize that one last time.
Well, repetitive could be anywhere in the county, Captain Massey.
It could, and it is. I agree.
Okay.
I just wanted to touch on this Tuolumne County ordinance that they had the first reading on last Tuesday. Do we want to take a position on that? I personally feel like it's.
Well, I thought Jim and Janice said they just saw it and they hadn't had a chance to look at it.
Well, Candace brought up a very valid point that this ordinance says emphatically that if you're operating an amplification system and you can hear it from more than 100 feet away, that it'll be deemed illegal. citable. Wakeboard rope is 75 feet long, and I just think that really, I'm surprised that Tuolumne County Sheriff's Department came up with something like this without talking to us, and apparently they didn't. They didn't contact me. I did talk to Sergeant DeMartini this morning, and he said that he was going to be here to talk to us and explain the background of this, but I think that we should open up an official dialogue with them to make sure that they don't go ahead with adopting this without us being sort of in not lockstep is not the right word, but we did 2 years ago, we started in on this procedure of making our ordinances on Lake Tulloch to be the same as the Tuolumne ordinances. And now it seems like that they've jumped out with a significant change, and in many ways we have too, because I don't think we've communicated with them the changes in this proposed noise ordinance as it might relate to Lake Tulloch. So I'm just hoping that we can kind of get back in the same room with them. So.
Yeah, if I may, I was contacted by Craig Pedro, the county administrative officer, after the Tuolumne County Board did take their action and had a first reading of their ordinance. They are very interested in our board's direction with regards to their language and would like us to get back to them, are willing to work with us. So whatever the direction board gives me, I will give Craig a call later today and let him know where we are with regards to our noise ordinance and their particular language.
It would be good for the lakes if we both had the same thing.
Yeah, very much.
For Lake Tulloch.
Well, and
We'll share
the lakes.
Yeah, we've got several. We share one with
What
Delta.
we used to do is add Lake Tulloch. This is an addition.
Yeah.
Do we have joint police with
So I think we need to give Captain Macedo and Miss Elliott a chance to look at it, to talk about it, and maybe they could get back to Jeannie with some thoughts so she can communicate with Tuolumne. I mean, it could be that we're not going to have an answer for them. And
That's what I hear.
I think,
if
Russ
it's-
is saying, we need to be the same. You might ask for his input too.
Okay, the other thing is I would like to maybe nudge this along with a little bit more alacrity, I guess that's a kind of a funny word, but we've been since April, and you've explained that we've had difficulties, but can we keep this moving so that it comes back sooner rather than later?
Supervisor Tron, I will, and I think I've done my best to communicate with you. But this does fall behind my job of managing criminal investigations that are ongoing in the county.
Really?
So
Did you want, are you asking?
with respect to that, this is very close to the top of my priority list. I realize the importance, but when I right now we're in the middle of a homicide investigation and some other things, but I promise you it's very close to the top of my list behind those criminal investigations.
Okay, thank you.
What he's saying is the same thing about the noise ordinance. It's not a high priority, but he will take care of it. Is that what?
It depends on where you sit.
And I'll
Depends
get,
on where you sit. Okay.
and Marita, I'll get back to the CAO over Tuolumne and let them know that Captain Macedo and our county council will be taking a look at their language, if they could hold off on any further action for another week or so.
And have Russ's input. Thank you. Okay, this meeting stands adjourned.
Do lunch.